The presence of a single Tiger tank on a World War II battlefield would send Allied tank crews into a panic. These armored monsters were almost invulnerable to Allied anti-tank weapons, and their powerful 88mm cannons could cut through the armor of American Shermans or Soviet T-34s like a knife through butter. Thankfully for the Allies, they never had to face large numbers of Tiger tanks. Initially, it was intended to provide every German panzer regiment with its own company of about a dozen of Tigers, but soon afterwards the German Army High Command decided that this was a mistake. The Tigers were to be concentrated in independent heavy tank battalions containing approximately 45 vehicles for decisive shock action. Tigers were intended to be used en masse to overwhelm their opponents with firepower. By the end of 1942, the Tiger force was ready for battle, and the Soviet winter offensive provided opportunity for the new tanks to prove their worth. In southern Russia, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein was soon to launch his famous counteroffensive to drive back the Soviet armies from the eastern Ukraine. The Waffen-SS and Großdeutschland Tiger companies were to be in the thick of this action when his panzer divisions turned on their pursuers in February of 1943 and advanced to retake the city of Kharkov. Exhausted by nearly 3 months of continuous offensive action and short on supplies, the Soviet armies in the Ukraine were in no condition to resist von Manstein's panzer strike. In the first days of the offensive, German panzer units took the Soviet columns by surprise, catching anti-tank guns still attached to towing vehicles and tanks stuck between supply trucks. Von Manstein's panzers enjoyed easy prey, shooting up almost defenseless convoys of panicked enemy troops. As the drive north to Kharkov gathered momentum, the Tigers were in the lead. Now the Germans began to run into whole brigades of anti-tank guns, dubbed back fronts, dug into prepared positions and bagged by T-34s. The Tigers came into their own because they were the only German tanks that could engage the pack fronts from a safe distance. If a direct frontal assault was required, then the Tigers could also safely advance and overrun the Soviet gun line. More lightly armored tanks, half-tracks and self-propelled guns followed in close behind, ready to exploit any gaps created by the Tigers. This tactic became known as the Panzerkeil or Panzer Wedge. This tactic came into its own during Operation Citadel, the Battle of Kursk, when the Soviets deployed so many interlocking pack fronts that it was impossible to outflank them. The only thing for the Germans to do was to try to batter their way through the pushing the Tigers to the fore. At Kursk, the Tigers were made easy work of the pack fronts, but it was slow work and losses were heavy. Huge minefields protecting the Soviet positions slowed the advance and knocked out many of the Tigers. Pioneers had to be repeatedly called forward to clear a path through the Soviet minefields so the advance could begin again. A week into Operation Citadel, the Tiger force was badly depleted, with only a handful of operational tanks left in each company. Only the superhuman efforts by tank maintenance crews, who night after night ventured onto the battlefield to get the damaged tanks working again, kept the Tiger force in action. The tank crews were worn out and exhausted after continuous action. The offensive was fully defeated on the 12th of July after the Soviets committed their strategic reserves during the Battle of Prokhorovka. In the largest tank engagement of the war, more than 850 Soviet tanks surged forward wave after wave against the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. Across a flat, open steppe, the brunt of the attack fell on the 1st SS Panzer Division's Panzer Regiment. With barely 70 tanks and assault guns, including only 4 Tigers, the regiment fought a desperate action throughout the day, taking on and defeating the Soviet tanks. The Tiger's 88mm cannons gave the Leibstandarte a huge range advantage, allowing Soviet tank brigades to be decimated before they got to within firing range of the German lines. Almost 200 Soviet tanks lay burning in front of the division at the end of the day. After Kursk, the German armies were forced on the defensive in Russia, and a growing number of Tigers were assigned to the Eastern Front, where they played a vital role in the German attempt to hold back the Soviet steamroller. Tiger battalions were thrown into a series of desperate battles, often holding long sections of front against overwhelming odds. However, during the winter of 1943 and 44, the effect of unending combat, mechanical breakdowns and unreliable supply lines meant that Tiger battalions could often only put a dozen tanks into the field.